My name is Lucas Harrison, and when it all happened, I was only 10 years old. I was just a regular boy, curious, full of energy, and always wanting to explore the world around me. I lived with my parents in a quiet neighborhood, and my life revolved around school, video games, and playing in the backyard with my dog, Max. My father was a practical man who spoke little about religion, and my mother, on the other hand, had an unshakable faith. She always told me that God was watching over me, that one day I would understand the importance of prayer. I listened, but to be honest, I never paid much attention. To me, God was something distant, something that might matter to adults, but not to a boy who just wanted to have fun. On the afternoon of July 18th, 2017, my life changed forever. We were on our way home after visiting my grandmother. My father was driving while my mother hummed a tune quietly, and I, in the back seat, was playing with a metal toy car I had received as a gift. Then everything happened very quickly. The shrill sound of honking cut through the air, followed by my mother's terrified scream. My father tried to turn the steering wheel, but it was already too late. An intense light filled my vision, and in the next instant, everything disappeared. There was no more car, road, or voices. I was in a dark place, a void so absolute that it seemed I no longer even had a body. At first, the silence was total, but soon I began to hear whispers, low, distant, as if they were coming from all sides at once. The whispers were strange. They did not sound like normal voices. At first, they were just murmurs, as if many people were speaking at the same time, but without forming words. I tried to move, but there was nothing around me. No ground, no air, no light. It was as if I had been ripped from the world and thrown into a place where nothing existed, only those strange sounds. Then the whispers began to change. Some words started to stand out in the midst of the murmur. Lucas! I clearly heard my name, but I did not know who was calling me. My heart, if I still had one, pounded hard. I wanted to run, to flee from there, but there was nowhere to go. That's when everything changed. A strong voice, unlike any other, echoed through the void, and the whispers stopped instantly. It was a powerful voice, yet at the same time serene, as if it carried a weight that did not belong to this world. As soon as I heard it, a light appeared out of nowhere, rapidly growing until it filled everything around me. But this light was not only clear, it was warm, alive, as if it had a will of its own. The moment it enveloped me, a feeling took hold of me. It was not fear nor pain. It was love. A love so great that it made my chest tighten, as if I were too small to bear it. And then I saw, in the midst of that light, there was a figure. At first I couldn't see clearly, but as my eyes adjusted, I began to see the outlines of someone. He was dressed in a white robe that shone as if it were made of pure liquid gold, and his face, I can't fully describe it. It was as if it held all expressions at once: strength, kindness, justice, sadness, compassion. But what struck me the most were his eyes. When I looked at him, I felt as if he knew everything about me, not only what I had done, but also what I felt, even the things I didn't fully understand myself. And then he spoke. Lucas, do you know why you are here? I opened my mouth to answer, but I couldn't, because suddenly everything around me began to change. The light dissolved, and I was pulled towards something that looked like a giant screen. But it wasn't like watching a movie. I was inside the scenes. It was my own life, but in a way I had never seen before. I saw myself as a small child, playing in the backyard while my mother prayed inside the house. I saw the moments when I ignored what she said about God, the days when I could have been kinder to my friends, but instead chose to mock them. But the worst part was not just watching. I felt everything again, as if I were inside those moments. I felt what the other people felt because of my actions, and it hurt. With each scene that played before me, the sense of weight increased. I had never thought much about how my actions affected others, but now everything was too clear. When I ignored my mother while she spoke about God, I felt her pain, the sadness of knowing that her own son did not want to listen about something so important to her. When I mocked a classmate for crying during recess, I felt the shame and loneliness he experienced in that moment. It was as if all my wrong choices were coming back to me in a way that I couldn't escape. I wanted to look away. I wanted everything to stop, but there was no way. Then, when I thought I couldn't bear it any longer, everything changed again. Suddenly, I was no longer watching my past. Now, I was looking at something completely different. I was floating above the earth, as if I were in space, but there was no beauty in what I saw. The world was plunged into chaos. Entire cities were on fire. People were running desperately through the streets, and fear hung in the air like an invisible poison. There were screams everywhere, but the worst was what I felt. A deep despair, a sense that everything was lost. It was as if the world was heading toward a terrible end, and no one could do anything to stop it. As I observed that frightening scene, something caught my attention. In the midst of the chaos, there were people who looked different. They did not run in panic like the others. Some were hidden, others gathered discreetly in small groups, praying and helping one another. But what impressed me the most was that they had something special. It was as if an invisible light surrounded them, protecting them from something I still couldn't understand. But this light did not prevent them from suffering. I saw some being chased, expelled from their homes, even imprisoned. They were being hunted not only by governments, but by ordinary people, as if they were a threat to the world. Then I noticed something even stranger. In the midst of the desperate crowds, many people had a symbol engraved on their foreheads and hands. It was a mark that seemed insignificant at first glance, something small and discreet. But the moment I noticed it, something inside me screamed that there was something terribly wrong with it. The people who carried the mark were different. They did not seem to feel fear or anger, only a kind of emptiness. It was as if they had lost something essential, something that made them human. When I looked at Jesus, he was watching me silently, as if waiting for me to understand on my own. I couldn't take my eyes off him. The more I observed those marked people, the more I felt a deep shiver. It wasn't just the emptiness in their eyes. It was the way they moved, the way they spoke. They seemed normal at first glance, but there was something wrong, something I couldn't explain. They did not express doubt or hesitation, only a strange obedience. Some smiled as if they were happy, but their smiles had no soul. It was a kind of artificial, programmed happiness. I saw a man approach a group of hidden Christians and, without hesitation, denounce them to soldiers patrolling the streets. He did not show hatred, nor satisfaction, nor remorse. He just did what seemed expected of him, as if it were an automatic reflex. And it was at that moment that I understood that Mark was not just a symbol. It erased something within people. What I saw next filled me with an even greater terror. In the center of a ruined city, a huge screen broadcast a message to the population. A smiling man with an impeccable appearance spoke in a calm that should have been reassuring, but which gave me chills. Unity, peace, progress. He repeated these words like a mantra, and the crowds around him seemed to absorb them without question. But his gaze was cold. Even with a smile on his face, his eyes were dead, without any trace of humanity. And then, in an instant of terrifying clarity, I realized who he was. Not because I had seen him before, but because something inside me screamed that he was the figure my mother always mentioned in her prayers, the one who would deceive the whole world. My heart pounded, even though I wasn't sure I still had a body there. I wanted to scream, to warn those people not to trust him, to run away. But they seemed completely hypnotized, as if they were under a spell. Some even cried with emotion as they listened to his words, as if he were a savior. Then, without warning, the broadcast changed to a strange ceremony. Rows of people entered a huge building, some sort of government center, and left there with the mark engraved on them. I saw a man hesitate before entering, trembling with fear, but when he came out, his look had changed. The terror that once filled his eyes had disappeared, replaced by the same empty expression as the others. It was as if something inside him had been switched off. And then I realized, accepting that mark was not just a symbolic act. It was a complete surrender, an exchange of something essential for a false sense of security. That's when I felt a hand gently resting on my shoulder. I turned around and saw Jesus looking at me with sadness. A choice is coming. Many will choose. Wrong. His voice was calm, but it carried an immense weight. I wanted to ask more, to understand what was happening, but before I could speak, the vision changed again. Now, I was in a church, but something was different. The pews were empty, the pulpit abandoned. Where there had once been praise and prayer, now there was only silence and dust. But then, I noticed a small group gathered at the back, hidden, holding old Bibles and whispering prayers. They were few, but the light that surrounded them was strong. They were willing to lose everything, even their lives, but they would not deny the truth. It was then that I realized what Jesus wanted to show me. It was not just about the future, but about the choice each person would make. Some would resist, but most. My chest felt tight. Everything seemed so real that I could almost smell the dust in the abandoned church, the weight of those walls that once were full of life, but now were just a refuge for a few. I wanted to ask Jesus why this was happening, why so many people were blind to what was so obvious to me at that moment. But before I could say anything, the vision changed again. Now, I was in a dark place, unlike anything I had ever seen before. The air was heavy, dense, and a suffocating heat enveloped me. I heard screams in the distance, laments of despair. I tried to move, but something held me in place. That's when I felt a presence around me, something malevolent that watched me without letting me see it. It was a fear I had never felt before, an absolute terror that made my entire body tremble, even though I wasn't sure I still had a body. Then a voice echoed in the darkness. It wasn't Jesus' voice. It was something different, distorted, full of disdain. "Now you understand, boy?" The words resonated around me like a muffled thunderclap. I couldn't see who was speaking, but I knew that this presence wanted to crush me, to make me doubt what I had seen. "They will never believe you. They will laugh, call you crazy. Do you think you can change anything?" The fear grew inside me, and for a moment I began to wonder if it was true. What could I do? I was just a boy. Who would listen to me? But then, in the midst of the darkness, I felt that same hand as before rest on my shoulder, the touch of Jesus. The moment he touched me, the darkness vanished like smoke in the wind, and I was back before him, enveloped by the purest light I had ever seen. Jesus looked at me with a serenity I couldn't fully comprehend. It was as if he knew everything I was feeling, the fear, the doubt, the feeling of being too small for something so great. "You will return," he said, and his voice was firm, yet full of compassion. "But know that many will not believe you. Many will mock, reject you, but some will listen. And for those, you must speak." I wanted to answer, to say that I was afraid, that I didn't know if I could do it. But before I could open my mouth, everything began to dissolve. The light around me turned into a blinding glare, and I felt as if I were being pulled back. The warmth of Jesus' touch was receding, and a second later, everything went dark. When I opened my eyes, I was in a hospital. My mother was crying by my side, holding my hand tightly, and my father was talking to a doctor with an incredulous expression. I tried to speak, but my throat felt dry, as if I hadn't used my voice in years. The doctor noticed that I was awake and was shocked. "Impossible," he murmured. I'd been clinically dead for 6 minutes. According to science, I should have suffered irreversible brain damage, but there I was, completely lucid, remembering every detail of what had happened. My mother noticed that I wanted to say something and leaned closer to me. "Lucas, my son, you're back," she whispered, her eyes full of tears. And at that moment, I knew that my life would never be the same again. In the following days, I tried to tell my parents what had happened, but my father, skeptical, thought they were just delusions caused by trauma. My mother, on the other hand, held my hands tightly and cried, saying that she had always known that God had a purpose for me. But when I tried to tell other people, I realized that Jesus was right. Many laughed at me, saying that I was only impressed by having survived. My school friends began to avoid me. Some even called me a liar. Even at the church my mother attended, some adults looked at me with suspicion, as if my story were an exaggeration or invention. It was painful to realize that most did not want to listen, did not want to believe that something so great was about to happen. But I couldn't ignore what I had seen. Since that day, my life changed completely. I began to seek answers, to study the Bible with my mother, to better understand what Jesus wanted to show me. I knew that my mission was not to convince everyone. It was to speak to those who were willing to listen. Even if few believed, I had to continue, because his words still echoed in my mind. Tell them, warn them, for soon the door will close.